In this lesson, we're going to be looking at some of the special words that are used when talking about algebra. First, we're going to need to remember a few things about algebra. Firstly, letters represent unknown values in maths, and so this is something plus 5. And if in the same question I saw 7 minus something, because they've got the same letter, that means that would have to be the same value. So it's something plus 5 and 7 minus the same something. If it was a different letter they used, then it could be a different something. And a letter next to a number means they're being multiplied. So if you saw 5t, you know that is 5 times t. It could also be two letters next to each other, and they're also being multiplied. That would be t times y there when you see ty next to each other. If you happen to see a little number up the top right, then that number is called an index, and the bottom one's called a base, and it means the base is being multiplied by itself. If the top number was a 3, that means the base is being multiplied by itself 3 times. So whatever number that is, that's how many times the base is being multiplied by itself. A fraction, whenever you see that, that's actually just the same thing as dividing. So fractions can be thought of as divisions, and so often when we're writing down one thing divided by another, we actually write it as a fraction. We often don't use the divide sign when we're doing algebra. Now there's also some special words that we need to remember: sum, difference, product, and quotient. So sum, that's the same as add, and so the sum of x and y is x plus y. Now difference is the same as subtract, and the difference of x and y is x minus y. But that can be a little bit unsure, the difference, because you're not sure which way should it go, x minus y or should it go y minus x. So oftentimes they'll say subtracted from instead, because that's more clear. And so if I did x subtracted from y, it actually means the y has to go first. If I don't write the y down first, x has got nothing to be subtracted from. And so the y's got to go down first, so x is subtracted from it. So when you see subtracted from, just remember they're actually the opposite way around than you might think there. The next one is product, and that is the same as times or multiply. And so the product of x and y, you just put the two things together if they're both letters or a letter and a number. And for quotient, that's the same as divide. And so the quotient of x and y is x divided by y, and it always goes the first one divided by the second. And notice I've just written as a fraction there. So that's x divided by y, because we don't use divide signs in algebra. We write them as fractions instead. Let's look at those words that we need to know. The first one is a term, which is either a single number, like 7, or it could be a single letter, like x, or it could be a number and a letter multiplied together, like 7x, or it could be just several letters multiplied together, mpx, that's a term, or it could be a number and several letters multiplied together. And so a term is any group of numbers and letters all together, basically without a plus or a minus sign. An expression is basically anything without an equal sign. So 3x plus 2 is an expression because it doesn't have an equal sign. If it has an equal sign, we call it an equation. So these are all expressions, mainly because none of them have got an equal sign in them. The next one is a coefficient, and this is the number that is in front of a term, including the sign. So if we take a look at this expression here, there's 4 terms there, 1, 2, 3, 4, all separated by the plus or minus signs. And the first one is x. Now the coefficient of x is 5, because there's a 5 in front of it. Now this is x squared. That is different to x, and so when I said the coefficient of x, it didn't include this. This is the coefficient of x squared, and the coefficient of x squared is 3. Now when we look at the coefficient of k, it's not just 2, because we've got to look at what's in front of it. See, with the x squared, the 3 was in front of it, but it was plus 3, so we just say 3. But this is minus 2, which means we call that negative 2 when we say the coefficient. So the coefficient of k is negative 2. And finally, with the coefficient of kx, first of all, that's not the same as the coefficient of k, because that's just k. This is kx. It's not the same as the coefficient of x or x squared either. So the letters have to be exactly the same, and the index numbers have to be exactly the same. And so with kx here, the coefficient of that, well, there's no number in front of it. And that means there's a 1 there. Remember, there's always a 1, even if it's not written down. So if there's no number in front of it, then there's always a 1 there. So the coefficient of kx is just 1, and it's positive 1 because that's a plus. Let's do some examples now. And so for the expression 3x plus 7y minus 2, we first of all need to state how many terms there are. Now there's no working required here because all I'm going to do is I'm going to count them. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. That's how many terms there are. So I can just write down 3. You don't need to show working if all you're doing is counting something on a page. And secondly, we need to list the terms. Again, there's not going to be any working here because they're right there in front of us. All we have to do is write them down. So it's 3x and it's 7y, and you might think it's -2, and this is a bit of a strange thing, particularly in the book, they just say 2, and so it's not asking for the coefficient of a letter here, it's just asking for what the term is, and when you're writing down the term itself, you just ignore whatever sign is in front of it, and you just say it's 2, so it's 3x, 7y, and 2. Now in the next one, we're going to write an expression for half of x subtracted from the product of 5 and y. Now remember, this subtracted from here, that means that the product of 5 and y has got to go first. And then we'll put minus half of x. So let's do the product of 5 and y to start with. And now we need to subtract half of x from that. And so subtraction is obviously just a minus sign. And half of x we can write like this, just x over 2. That is half of x. If it was a third of x, we'd write x over 3, a quarter of x, x over 4, and so on. And now, you just need to be careful with those ones. It is very easy to write them the wrong way around, simply because half of x comes first in the question. It's very easy to write that down first, but remember, subtracted from means that half of x has to have something to be subtracted from, and if you haven't written down 5y yet, it's got nothing, in this one, it's got nothing to be subtracted from. This is actually 5y subtracted from half of x, the wrong way around. And now in the next one, we've got to state the coefficient of x in this expression. Now we just need to be careful because there is an x and there's an x squared. And we are after the coefficient of x. If it wanted this one here, it would have to say the coefficient of x squared. So we're after this one, and we also need to be careful. The answer is not just 3, it is -3. We must include that sign in front of it. And so we can just write down -3. Again, there's no working here because the answer is right there on the page in front of us. Now finally, we're going to describe the following expression in words, 4x minus 3, and we want to use those special words. And so first of all, I've got 4x here, so that's the product of 4 and x. And I've also got the 3 here. Now remember, I don't want to say the product of 4 and x minus 3. I want to use that subtracted from. And so that means I'm actually going to start off with 3 subtracted from the product of 4 and x. So using those special words, those maths way of saying it, I have to go 3 first and say what it's subtracted from, which is the product of 4 and x. Let's try a couple of practice questions here. Remember to pause the video. And there's our solution, no working required. And just note on this bottom one here, you could actually have that the other way around because they're being added. You could have y over 3 plus x over 2. That would be fine. Let's just quickly go through those now. So for the first one, I had to state how many terms there are in this expression. And there's 2. There's the 2x and there's the 6y. They're just separated by the minus sign. And when I'm listing those terms, I can just list them as 2x and 6y. I don't need to write down -6y. It's not asking for the coefficient. It's just asking for the term. And so there's my answers for those. Secondly, the next one, I had to state the coefficient of m in this expression. And so I just look for the m, and the number in front of it is the coefficient. It's nice, there's no minus sign in front of it, and it's right at the start, so it's just 5. And finally, I'm writing the expression for half of x added to a third of y. And so this is my half of x here, and I'm adding, so that's a plus sign, and then I do a third of y. So remember to do third of y, just y with a 3 underneath it. Here are some extra practice questions if you need to have another go. Remember to pause video. And there's the solutions to those ones. Hopefully you got them right. If not, do remember to ask for some extra help. And that's the end of the lesson.